My ex-husband cheated on me and blatantly favors his new family over ours, so now our kids treat him like he doesn't exist and he's crying that I've poisoned them against him. Posted by you/glitteringmale117. I'm 33 and have 2 kids, 12 and 8. I divorced their dad when I discovered he was cheating on me with a mom from our younger son's school group. Despite that betrayal, I agreed to shared custody because I wanted my kids to grow up with their father in their lives. However, since the divorce, he's only been around when picking them up for visits. He often goes out with his stepchildren but rarely includes our kids, claiming those outings are spur of the moment and can't always include them. Eventually, I stopped pushing, but I've always thought it was unfair that he keeps his distance from our children's lives. Recently, I decided to upgrade my older son's computer, and he asked if we could give his old one to his cousin, my brother's son. My brother has been a huge support for my kids. He's always available to take them to their school events when I can't and often takes them out to the park or on trips when I'm busy. My ex, on the other hand, is rarely available for them. Anytime I ask him to help with an activity, he has an excuse: he's out of town or swamped with work. Ironically, though, whenever his stepkids need something, he's there. Once, he even argued with the stepkid's father at a school event, saying he had the right to be there. When my ex found out I gave the computer to my nephew, he got upset. He complained that if I had money to spare on a gift like that, I should have forgiven the 2 months of child support he'd missed since his finances were tight with a new baby. He said that if I could give away a computer, I should have gifted it to either his kids or his stepkids, who share just one computer among the 3 of them. I told him my finances were none of his business, and that I owed nothing to his stepchildren. Then his wife jumped into the conversation, telling me I'm spoiling my son by giving him a new computer and that I'm being petty for letting my son bring it to their house, and saying that I just wanted him to show it off in front of his step-siblings. I told her she had no right to speak to me that way or question my decisions. I said that I allow my kids to see their father so they can grow up with him in their lives, not so she can interfere with how I parent. My ex was offended, but I told him this whole situation could have been avoided if his wife hadn't inserted herself where she doesn't belong. After that, things seemed to calm down until last week. I went to pick up the kids, and my ex was visibly upset. He explained that he tried reading a bedtime story to our youngest. At home, he still likes to be read to before bed, usually by me, his brother, or my brother, and when none of us are around, he listens to audiobooks. Apparently, my ex wanted to make an effort to connect, so he offered to read to him, but our son turned him down and said he didn't need him for that because he could do it himself. My ex stayed to listen as he searched for a story for 8-year-olds without a dad on his tablet, and it hit him hard. The next day, my ex offered to take our older son to basketball practice, but he replied that he'd be going with his dad. He quickly corrected himself and said uncle. That made my ex even angrier, and when I came to pick up the kids, he confronted me about it. I told him that if our kids feel like they don't have a father, he is only himself to blame. He tried to shift the blame onto me, saying I was the one pushing him away from his role. I told him it's up to him to show up for his kids, not something I can do for him. I reminded him he was the one who broke our family, and he's chosen to be more involved with his stepkids than with his own children. I told him not to kid himself. The kids are growing up, and they're starting to see the reality of who he is as a father. If he keeps this up, he can't expect much from them in the future. After that exchange, his mom called me. While she's always been polite to me, I felt the need to say that I would have appreciated this same concern from her when she supported her son's affair, knowing her grandchildren were losing their father in the process. She hung up, and we haven't spoken since. My brother told me that I had every right to express how I feel, but he suggested that maybe this discussion shouldn't have happened in front of the kids. Later, my ex texted me, saying that if I weren't so difficult, he'd spend more time with them. I told him his duty as a father doesn't depend on whether I'm easy or not, and he knows I've never prevented him from seeing the kids. The truth is, when he has to choose, he prefers outings with his stepkids over his own children, and that's something only he can change. Update 11 days later. These past days have been a bit unusual. First, I want to thank all of you. I didn't expect to receive so much advice, and I never thought this app would be so useful. It's not very popular in my country. Now, back to the topic. My ex sent me messages saying he wanted to resolve things, stop arguing, and talk to me. I agreed. He came to my house, and we didn't beat around the bush, we went straight to the point. He asked me if I really thought he was a bad father. I replied that, looking back now, I never would have chosen him to be the father of my children. He said it wasn't easy for him, and I answered that it wasn't easy for me either because I take on both his role and mine. He told me he couldn't leave his stepchildren without a father because he had already broken their family, and I replied that he had left his own children without a father. He started crying and told me it was my fault, saying that when the infidelity happened, I refused to forgive him or go to couples therapy. To that, I unloaded many things that were going through my mind. I'll admit they weren't kind, but none of them were lies. He asked me if, given his current state, I didn't feel sorry for him, and I said no. He told me he didn't think I could be so cruel, and I replied that when I changed jobs, pulled my kids out of school 2 months before the end of the term, moved houses, and watched him disappoint our kids over and over again, any empathy I might have felt turned into apathy. He left after that. His mother called me and said she knew what I had told her son, that he hadn't stopped crying, and that she didn't understand how I could carry so much hatred to hurt her son like that. She said I should just get over it. I answered, with all due respect, what I said wasn't out of hatred but out of truth. If your son is crying, it's because he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. Maybe instead of worrying about how he feels now, you should have taught him to take responsibility and treat people with respect. She said I didn't know what it was like to feel a mother's love and see a child suffer, and I replied that I did understand because I have 2 children who cry over a living father. 2 children who see their dad being a father to other kids when he doesn't have time to be their father. She said he was sorry, and I told her not to put words in his mouth and to stop calling me about anything related to her son. I hung up. I wanted to cry so badly, but I'm a damned mother, and I don't have time for that. I want my kids to feel safe, loved, and strong enough not to need anyone, not even me, to be themselves. Last Thursday, I took my kids to their cousin's birthday party, hosted by my ex-sister-in-law. I still have a good relationship with her. She was the one who told me about the infidelity and that her mother was already encouraging it. My ex showed up alone and irritated. My kids kept their distance from him. They kissed his hand but then ignored him completely. My ex-mother-in-law told the kids they should show more respect to their father, and my eldest replied that he doesn't show respect for me since he and his partner talk badly about me. I scolded my son, not for what he said but for how he addressed his grandmother. I told him it was wrong to eavesdrop on private conversations and repeat them. Then I asked him to gather his things because we were leaving. My ex-mother-in-law asked me not to leave, saying the kids were having fun and we could resolve this as adults. She asked my ex what he had said, and he claimed not to remember. I told her I didn't care, and she said we should be good parents. I replied that to be good parents, you need to be good people first. My ex was getting agitated. My ex-mother-in-law asked why we couldn't have a civilized co-parenting relationship. I told her everything I've mentioned here about his free will to see the kids and how the second custody agreement isn't working since he only sees them some weekends. My ex didn't want to discuss it and said he had too many kids at home. My ex-mother-in-law told him the only kids who should feel comfortable are his, and the comfort of the others should be provided by their biological father. My ex wanted to end the conversation because his mother was scolding him for being a careless father. He also said it was my fault. I asked him to clarify how it was my fault. You can see the kids whenever you want, what more do you want? He started yelling, saying I was only being petty because I didn't really need the money since I earned more than him and had fewer kids to feed. I told him I wouldn't continue the conversation and that I'd show him what being uncivilized looks like by filing for the overdue child support payments. His mother asked what I meant by overdue payments. I explained that he was 3 months behind. She was furious, slapped him, and demanded to know what he had done with the money for his children. He answered, I couldn't let stepson's name miss out on attending the same school as my son. I didn't want him to feel inferior. My ex-mother-in-law said she couldn't believe it, and they started arguing. Regardless, I left. For context, my youngest son attends a private school, and my ex pays for his stepson to attend the same school. Yesterday, my ex-mother-in-law came over and said she would pay the overdue fees. She brought the money in cash. I knew my ex would be furious. Here's some context: my ex-mother-in-law doesn't work, doesn't own anything herself, and lives with my ex-sister-in-law. However, she does have significant savings from her inheritance. If she pays the tuition, my ex knows there won't be much left for him when she passes, even though she's still healthy. He's been asking her for years to invest some of that money in his business ideas, but she's always refused. My ex's retaliation was not picking up the kids this weekend. Yesterday, my ex-sister-in-law called me. She doesn't know all the details yet, but apparently, my ex's 15-year-old stepson punched him in the mouth. She said she'll let me know exactly what happened when she finds out. And before anyone asks, the new custody agreement will likely take a year to finalize. The court says the overdue payments are the priority, and the rest can wait. We have more urgent cases. Edit. A promise is a promise. As I mentioned earlier, my ex's stepson had an altercation with him because my ex refused to let him go out. Now I have more details. My ex's stepson had plans to go bowling with some friends. His biological father had already given him permission and money for the outing. However, when he told his mother, she said he couldn't go because they needed him to stay home and watch his younger siblings. My ex and his wife had planned an outing and needed someone to stay with the kids. This led to an argument. The boy raised his voice to his mother, and my ex stepped in to demand that he respect her. The boy replied that he wasn't his father. Trying to maintain authority, my ex told him that as long as he lived under his roof, he had to follow his rules. The boy ignored him and turned away. My ex followed him and touched his shoulder to get his attention. At that moment, the boy turned around, punched him, and shouted that he wasn't his father and could never compare to him. The mother scolded him for his behavior, but the boy, still angry, shouted back that he hated her. This version was shared by my ex and his wife with my ex-mother-in-law. My sister-in-law later relayed it to me. They went to see my ex-mother-in-law to try to gain her sympathy and convince her to take care of the kids, the 2 stepchildren and the baby, so they could go out. However, my ex-mother-in-law told them she would not take care of the children. When I spoke to my ex, he mentioned he was dealing with family issues and said that the boy's biological father was turning him against him. He didn't give me many details and omitted most of what my sister-in-law had shared. He simply informed me that, due to the situation, he wouldn't be able to pick up our children this weekend. The 15-year-old boy is now staying with his biological father. As for what I mentioned earlier, my ex was 2 months behind on child support, and that same week, he was supposed to make another payment. He didn't, leaving him 3 months behind. In the end, his mother was the one who covered the overdue amount. Regarding the child who attends the same school as my son, it's not the 15-year-old involved in the altercation. It's his younger stepbrother, who is 8 years old, the same age as my son. I decided to enroll my son in that school when the affair became public. At the time, I was working as a kindergarten teacher at the same school, and the boy had been one of my students. We all knew each other, and to protect my children from rumors, I transferred them to a private school. This happened 2 months before the school year ended. Thanks to the circumstances and the support of some kind people, we managed to get them admitted. Up in the comments. When the infidelity occurred, I was an elementary school teacher pursuing a master's degree. Now, I am a secondary school teacher working in a government institution. My salary is 4 times higher than it was before the divorce. I worked at a public school because I wanted to be close to my children in case something happened. As I mentioned before, my son is still in a private school, but his father pays the tuition so that his stepson can attend as well.